The wind across that prairie didn't whisper. It screamed. It tore over the flat earth like God himself had forgotten this place existed. And honestly, maybe he had. Ruth walked through it with a baby on her hip, a little girl clinging to her skirt, and a boy, her oldest, who'd stopped crying hours ago. His hands were bleeding from pulling a broken wagon wheel until his palm split open. And here's the thing nobody tells you about dying slow on the plains. You don't get a choice. You just keep walking. Behind them, the wagon stood crooked. Useless. 2 oxen had dropped dead where they stood, and Ruth hadn't buried them. She didn't have the strength. Her husband's boots flapped at her heels, too big, stolen from a man who'd walked away and never came back. Her lips were cracked, her eyes burned. And somewhere ahead, she thought there might be a post road, maybe a town, maybe nothing at all. Then the land moved. At first, she thought it was a mirage. Heat does that, plays tricks. But this shape kept coming. A man on horseback, tall and steady, emerging from the blur like something out of a fever dream. Ruth froze. The baby whimpered. The boy behind her staggered, trying to stand straight even though his legs were giving out. And the man, he just sat there on his gray gelding, watching, not speaking, not moving, just watching. Ruth's knees almost buckled. She took a step back, but there was nowhere to go. The man dismounted, slow and deliberate, and reached into his saddlebag. For a weapon? For rope? No, a canteen. He unscrewed the top and held it out. "It's clean," he said. His voice was gravel. Not cruel, not kind, just tired. She didn't move. He took a drink himself, wiped the rim with his sleeve, and offered it again. This time she took it. Water dribbled down her chin. She gave it to the baby next, then the boy. The baby clutched it and cried when it emptied. The man watched all of this without a word. Then he crouched down, eye level with the boy, and asked his name. The boy said nothing. He was shivering. "Come on," the man said. "Night's coming." Ruth flinched. Night meant cold. Open sky. Coyotes. Maybe worse. But what choice did she have? The man looked at her, his face shadowed under his hat. "There's a cabin up the ridge. Mine. Not far." She didn't answer. The baby whimpered again, a sound like wind through broken glass. "You'll freeze," he said. "Not tonight." Ruth looked at the sky, red now, darkening to violet. He waited. When she still didn't move, he whistled once, low, and the horse came forward. He lifted the boy first, set him on the saddle. Then the girl. Ruth held the baby tighter. "I can walk." "I know," he said. He didn't offer to help her. Just turned and started up the rise, the horse following. She went after him. Every step was a question asked of her bones. Why keep going? But the stars came out one by one. The wind softened. And the outline of a house, a real house, emerged on the ridge. A single oil lamp burned inside. Smoke climbed from the chimney. The scent of wood smoke and coffee hit her like something sacred. He opened the door and stood aside. She entered without speaking. Inside it was warm. The girl knelt by the fire without being told. The boy sank to the floor and didn't move. The man pulled a quilt from a chest and laid it over the children. "Not tonight," he said again. Then he turned and stoked the fire. Ruth stood near the hearth, rocking the baby without realizing it. Her eyes locked on the man's back as he moved through the small space with quiet purpose. He didn't ask questions, just ladled stew into a chipped bowl and set it on the table. Then another. He moved with the steadiness of a man used to silence, used to ghosts. "Sit," he said finally. She lowered herself like a woman 3 times her age. When she reached for the spoon, her fingers fumbled and clattered against the bowl. It was stew, beans, maybe venison, salted well, hot. She fed the baby some broth with a fingertip. The child smacked its lips, eyes fluttering half shut. He ate across from her, not looking directly at her, but not avoiding her either. He was a big man, not threatening, just present. His beard was patchy. His shirt had been mended more than once. A man who did for himself. No ring, no decoration. "You came from the west?" he asked. She nodded. "Where to?" She hesitated. "Wherever the land would take us." He gave a soft snort, not unkind, just knowing. "Wagons break," he said. "Oxen, too." She didn't answer. The words sat like stones in her chest. The girl had curled into a ball near the hearth. The boy slept with his mouth open. The baby had gone limp against her chest, fed and full. "You got folks?" "No." He didn't press. A long silence followed. Not uncomfortable, just wide, like the prairie itself. "My name's Eli," he said. She didn't respond right away. Then, "Ruth." He nodded once. "You can stay." Her head jerked up. "I don't want—" "Didn't say you did." He leaned back, chair groaning under him. "But it's cold, and the ground's no place for children." Ruth looked down at her bowl. The food was gone, but the warmth of the meal began to seep into her limbs. "I can work," she said quietly. Eli nodded. "Good." They didn't speak again that night. He pulled a bedroll from under the cot and laid it on the far side of the hearth. She lowered the baby beside her on the pallet, pulled the quilt up, and curled herself around them all like a shell. Eli lay on his side, facing the dark. Outside, the wind moaned once more, then moved off. In the stillness, Ruth stared at the ceiling beams and tried to remember her husband's voice. It was no longer clear. Only the anger remained, and the sound of his boots, walking away for the last time. But here, in this silence, she reached for the baby's foot, warm against her belly, and felt the beat of something steady. Not joy, not yet, but something like breath returning after a long time underwater. Morning came slow and pale. Frost clung to the windows. Ruth stirred before the children, her body stiff, but rested in a way she hadn't known in weeks. The fire was low, but not dead. Eli was already outside. She could hear the scrape of a shovel, the dull thud of wood being split. A man who woke with work in his bones. Ruth poured water into the basin and scrubbed her face with rough cloth. The cold bit her skin, but she welcomed it. She braided her hair with cracked fingers and used the last button on her blouse to hold the collar closed. The door creaked when she opened it. The air hit her hard, sharp and bright, the sun cutting across the hills like a blade. Eli stood near the woodpile, sleeves rolled, axe in hand. He didn't look up. "I can do that," she said. He didn't stop. "So can I." "I mean it." He paused, the axe lowered, but didn't drop. "You split wood before?" "No." "Then you'll cook." That was the end of it. She worked without complaint. The kitchen was simple, but had enough: flour, lard, dried apples. She kneaded biscuit dough with aching hands while the baby fussed in a wooden box lined with a horse blanket. The older girl helped slice apples, careful and quiet. The boy sat by the window, a blanket around his shoulders, eyes tracking the room like he expected it to vanish. When Eli came back in, his boots tracked snow across the threshold. He nodded once, not at her, but at the smell in the air. Then he poured himself coffee. They ate at the table, the children silent but awake now, chewing with desperate focus. Ruth sat last, arms crossed tight, only half tasting the food. Afterward, Eli stood and pulled on his coat. "I've got fence to mend, stock to check. You and the children stay inside. There's books if they read. Firewood stacked, water in the barrel. Ruth stood. "I'll come with you." He gave her a long look, then a slow nod. They walked the ridge in silence. The snow was thin, more ice than powder, crunching underfoot. He handed her gloves. "You hold the post. I'll wire." Her hands were clumsy, cold even through the leather, but she held steady. He worked fast, looping wire tight, his fingers sure. They didn't talk, but there was something in the way he looked at the sky before driving a nail, the way he squinted toward the hills like he expected bad weather, or worse, men. Later, they found a ewe down by the stream, her leg twisted in the brush. She bleated weakly, half frozen. Ruth stepped forward before he could. She knelt, murmured soft words, and began to free her. Eli watched, not moving. "She's heavy," Ruth said. He bent down, lifted the sheep like a child, and carried her back toward the barn. When the sun dipped again, they returned with mud on their boots and blood on their sleeves. Ruth's arms shook from effort, but something in her chest had started to hum. Not pride, just proof that she was still alive. That night, as the fire burned low, Eli poured her coffee first. It was a small thing, but it cracked something open in her chest. The days fell into rhythm, rough but steady. Ruth rose before the sun, sometimes before Eli. The children no longer clung to her skirt. The boy took to splitting kindling. The girl fed the hens and swept ash without being asked. The baby grew quiet, watchful, as if the silence of the cabin had settled into his bones. Winter hovered on the edge of the hills. Snow came in brief flurries. Ruth patched clothes by firelight, her stitches crooked but strong. She found an old coat in a chest and took it in to fit the girl. Eli watched her one evening, then went to the barn and came back with a leather strap and knife sheath. He set it on the table without a word. It wasn't a gift. Not exactly. It was permission. She took the sheath and began wearing it the next morning. The silence between them changed. Where once it felt like a wall, it now felt more like a path waiting to be walked. Ruth started asking questions: how many cattle he kept, whether he traded in town, where the nearest school might be. Eli didn't answer everything, but he listened. Once he handed her a tin box from the mantel. Inside were photographs, faded, curled at the corners. A woman with a long braid, a boy in overalls, a man beside a horse. "Your family?" she asked. He nodded. "My brother. The other's gone now." "How?" He looked into the fire. "Winter and fever. Some men rode through, took what they wanted, left the door open on their way out." Ruth closed the tin slowly. She didn't speak of her husband. Not yet. But Eli never asked. He could see the way her eyes dulled when the wind picked up just right. The way her hands tightened around the baby's shirt when someone knocked at the door. A traveling trader once, who lingered too long with his eyes. Eli sent him off with a sack of oats and a look that promised worse than hunger. That night Ruth stood outside, staring up at the stars. Eli joined her without sound. "Thought you'd leave," he said after a while. "I did too." "What changed?" She thought for a long time. The baby stirred on her shoulder. They started sleeping through the night. He nodded like he understood. Over the next week, the snow deepened. Eli taught the boy to trap rabbits. He showed the girl how to hold a rifle. Ruth learned to saddle the gelding and ride short distances, her spine still stiff with old fear, but her hands steady on the reins. At night they sat by the fire and read aloud, simple stories, psalms, a journal left behind by someone long dead. One morning, Ruth rose to find the barn door open. Inside, Eli was saddling the gelding, jaw tight. "You're leaving." "No," he said. "Someone's coming." She didn't ask how he knew. The air itself had changed. He could read it the way she once read ledgers, numbers balanced like footsteps in a room. By noon, the riders appeared. 2 men, lean and grim, on horses slick with sweat. Ruth knew them before they spoke. One carried her husband's hat tied to his saddle horn. She stood in the doorway, rifle held low. Eli stepped out beside her. He didn't draw, didn't flinch. The man with the hat sneered. "Didn't think you'd make it this far." "She's not going with you," Eli said. "She's mine," the man spat. "No," Ruth said. "I'm not." There was a long pause. One of the men reached toward his belt. Eli moved first. The crack of the rifle split the air. One horse bolted. The second man fell hard. The one with the hat fled into the trees. Ruth didn't move. Her heart thundered, but her hands didn't shake. Later, after they dragged the wounded man to the edge of the property and warned him not to return, Ruth stood in the field with her eyes closed. Snow fell like ash, slow and soft. Eli came to her side. "They'll come back," she said. "Maybe. You don't have to protect us." "I know." She looked at him, really looked. Not at the man who gave them bread and shelter, but the one who stayed when he had every reason to walk away. "I want to stay," she said. He didn't smile, just took off his hat and ran a hand through his hair. "Then stay." That night, Ruth moved her things into the back room. The baby slept beside her, the girl on a cot, the boy near the fire. But her eyes stayed open long after the others had fallen still. Outside, the snow deepened, but the cabin stayed warm. The snow didn't let up for days. It softened the land, covered the broken things, hushed every sound except the crack of wood and the hush of breath. Ruth moved through the space like she belonged to it, no longer afraid to touch things, to rearrange what needed changing. She cleaned out the cupboard, ground dried corn into meal, mended Eli's threadbare shirts with even stitches. One night she found herself humming a lullaby her mother used to sing. The sound startled her. It had been years. Eli glanced up from the fire, said nothing, but his hand stilled on the mug in his lap. They passed the storm in chores and silence, in shared glances and quiet labor. The children's cheeks grew pink from the heat, not cold. The girl smiled more. The boy, who once spoke in nods and shrugs, asked Eli how to lash snowshoes. The mornings belonged to work, the evenings to stories, some half-true, some invented. Ruth told one about a woman who crossed the plains with a sack of silver buttons and nothing else. The girl listened with wide eyes. Eli added one about a mule that wouldn't die, no matter how many men tried to shoot it. They laughed at that, Ruth with her head bowed, hand covering her mouth like it might betray her. One morning, after the worst of the storm passed, Ruth walked out alone. The cold bit her face, but she welcomed it. The sky was so blue it hurt to look at. She followed the fence line, boots sinking into drifts. She needed to see the edge of things, to remind herself it was still out there, that this cabin wasn't a dream. She came to the place where the 2 riders had crossed. Their tracks were buried, but the memory rose fresh. Her husband's hat, that look in his eyes. She'd seen it before, in the mirror, on nights she'd lain awake counting bruises by lamplight. She thought of Eli, the way he'd said, "I know," when she told him he didn't have to protect them. Not because he didn't want to, but because he understood what it meant to choose safety for yourself. When she returned, Eli was at the stove, sleeves rolled, turning something in a cast-iron pan. He brushed snow from her shoulders without asking. "You all right?" he said. "I think so." He watched her a moment. "You don't have to be strong all the time." "I don't know how to be anything else." His hand lingered on her shoulder, then dropped. That night, the baby had a fever, not high, but enough to pull Ruth into motion. She stayed up with him, sponge and cloth. The fire fed again and again until the cabin glowed orange. Eli didn't sleep either. He brought water, sat nearby, close but not crowding. The baby's breathing steadied near dawn. Ruth slumped back, one hand still pressed to his chest. "Thank you," she whispered. Eli didn't answer, but he reached over and touched the baby's foot. Just once, and that was enough. The next morning, Ruth found a wooden box outside the door. Inside were tiny carved animals: a horse, a dog, a bear, worn smooth from years of use. She knew they hadn't been made recently. She brought them inside, set them in the girl's lap. "Where did they come from?" the girl asked. "Someone who wanted you to have them," Ruth said. Eli said nothing, just went back to chopping wood. Later, as the children played by the hearth, Ruth stepped onto the porch and leaned on the railing, her breath clouding in front of her. Eli stood a few feet away, one boot resting on the top stair. "I keep waiting for this to end," she said. "What? This peace? This quiet?" He nodded. "It might, but I want to hold on to it." He didn't look at her. "Then you should." They stood there, snow falling soft between them, not touching, but close. The thaw came slow, not all at once like mercy, but in cautious slips. Ice loosening from the eaves, a drip of water falling from the pump handle, mud rising in patches through the snow. The land groaned beneath it, aching from winter's weight, but waking just the same. Ruth could feel the shift inside her, too, like some hidden part had been frozen and was now learning how to move again. She stood in the doorway, watching the horizon melt back into shape. The baby on her hip reached for the sunlight, fingers splayed, as if even he knew something had changed. Behind her, the cabin stirred with life. Eli moved through the morning with purpose, boots heavy on the floorboards, jacket already slung over his shoulder. He was heading out to check the fence line and the traps near the ridge. Ruth had gone with him most days, her hands no longer hesitant with wire or axe, her stride nearly matching his. But today, he hesitated at the door. "You should rest," he said. "I'm not tired." He looked at her then. Really looked. There was something behind his eyes, not fear, not pity, just a softness that hadn't been there before. Something like hope, but quieter. He stepped out into the light without another word. Ruth let the baby down, watched as he crawled toward his sister, with that unsteady but determined crawl only children know. The girl scooped him up with a laugh, twirling once before falling onto the rug with a thud. The boy sat carving a stick near the fire, lips pursed in focus. None of them noticed how still she stood, how full her chest felt with something close to peace. But not everything had melted. That afternoon, as Ruth scrubbed laundry in a basin by the door, a wagon crested the far hill. Not fast, not menacing, but unfamiliar. She wiped her hands on her skirt and stepped down into the mud, squinting. A woman drove it, alone but confident, reins in one hand, the other holding her bonnet against the wind. She wore black, not deep mourning, but something more practical. A sign she belonged to the land, not to any man. The wagon rolled to a stop just outside the gate. "You Eli McRae's people?" the woman called. Ruth hesitated. "He's up at the ridge." The woman nodded. "Heard he was still living. Thought I'd pay my respects." "You knew him?" "Long time ago. My name's Miriam Ridge. My brother died on this land." Ruth felt the words settle like dust in her lungs. "You better come in." Inside, Miriam sat at the table, hands folded, gaze sweeping the room with the kind of ease only frontier women knew, measuring safety, assessing risk, noticing what others missed. Ruth poured her coffee, offered bread, which Miriam took but didn't touch. "I came to collect something," she said. "A keepsake, Nothing more. What kind of keepsake? Miriam looked toward the mantel. There was a book, a ledger. My brother kept it. Ruth had seen it. She stood, retrieved it, placed it gently between them. Miriam didn't open it. She just ran her fingers over the cover. He died here, Miriam said. Yes, Ruth said. But he died with dignity. He built this place. It still stands because of him. The woman nodded slowly. He was the kind to do things right. They sat quiet for a while, the only sound the hiss of firewood and the baby's soft breathing. You live here now? Miriam asked. For now. Hard life. Ruth looked at her hands, red, raw, nicked from fence wire and kitchen knives. Yes, she said, but it's mine. When Eli returned, the sun was already leaning low. He didn't speak when he saw Miriam, just stepped inside and took off his hat. Hello, Eli. Miriam. She stood, holding the ledger. I won't stay. I just needed to see it. Make peace, I suppose. He nodded. You're welcome here. I can see that. Her eyes went to Ruth once more, then to the children. You take care of each other, she said. That's all there is. And then she was gone. That night the silence felt different, heavier but not hollow. Eli sat by the fire, the baby asleep against his chest. Ruth sat across from him, mending a tear in his coat. I was thinking, he said. There's land east of the creek. Good soil. She didn't look up. What about it? Could plant wheat. Maybe build a second house someday. Room for more. She set the coat down. For what? He met her eyes. For whatever comes next. Ruth stood, crossed the room, and knelt beside his chair. Her hand brushed the baby's head, then rested lightly on Eli's knee. I'm not afraid of staying anymore. He reached up, touched her face just once, as if making sure she was real. You're not just staying, he said. You're building. Outside, the thaw continued, slow but certain. The roof dripped steady. The creek ran clearer each day. And inside the cabin, a future began to take shape. Not in grand gestures, but in the simple things. Warmth, bread, breath, a place to rest without fear. Spring took hold without ceremony. One morning, the frost simply didn't return. The earth, long clenched beneath snow and silence, exhaled. Buds crept from the scrub trees. The air thickened with the scent of thawed soil and wet pine. Every bird, it seemed, remembered its name at once. Ruth planted with bare hands, pressing seeds into the soft ground while the baby played in the dirt beside her. The girl helped, her face streaked with soil, humming tunelessly. Eli had tilled the ground with a stubborn mule and a blade he kept sharpening long after it needed it. Now Ruth claimed it. She needed this garden, not just for food, but for proof. Proof that something could grow here after everything that had died. The boy built a scarecrow from rags and 2 sticks. He named it Henry and saluted it every morning like a soldier. The girl laughed, a real laugh, like water over smooth stones. That night Eli brought out a tin box she hadn't seen before. He opened it slowly, almost reverently. Inside was a ring, plain, worn, the kind a man gave without flourish. He didn't kneel. He didn't speak. He just held it out. Ruth stared at it, her breath caught. Then she reached for it with steady hands and slid it onto her finger. They didn't need words. Afterward, they stood outside, watching the stars come out. The wind tugged at her hair. Eli's arm rested against hers, warm and solid. Somewhere, an owl called. The sound didn't spook her. The next day, they rode into town with the children, packed into the wagon with bread, preserves, and strips of dried meat. Ruth wore the ring, and she didn't flinch when eyes followed her. They traded for seed, new boots for the boy, a slate and chalk for the girl. The baby clapped his hands at the clatter of horseshoes on the main street. The townsfolk watched them, some curious, some cautious. No one said a word, but someone opened the door to the chapel and nodded. Eli tied the reins and stepped down. Ruth followed. They walked in without ceremony. No preacher, no guests, just silence and the smell of wood smoke and old hymns. They stood at the front and he took her hands. He whispered something. She didn't catch it all, but the last word was mine. Not in the old way, not like a claim, like a vow. They kissed once, chaste, firm, real. Outside, the children were waiting. The boy grinned. The girl clapped. The baby reached for the sky. They rode home with the sun behind them, casting long shadows on the land that now belonged to all of them. Later, Ruth planted more rows, beans, squash, corn, a mix of wildflowers at the edge. She told Eli they were for the bees. He said nothing, just watched her hands as they pressed life into the soil. Weeks passed. The land warmed. The house stood stronger now. New shutters, patched roof, smoke rising from the chimney each morning like a promise. Inside there were new shelves, a cradle by the window, a row of boots by the door. The children had grown heavier, louder, happier. One afternoon, Ruth found Eli sitting by the fence, whittling something. She sat beside him. "What are you making?" He turned the wood in his hands. "A cradle cross." She touched his shoulder, let her hand rest there. "I think I'm with child," she said. His knife stopped moving. He looked at her, not shocked, but filled with something heavier, something like awe. "I reckon we'll need more space," he said. She smiled. "I reckon." And that night, they lay in bed as the wind moved through the grass, no longer cruel, just alive. The baby slept, the children dreamed. And Ruth, at last, let herself believe in what tomorrow might bring. Come summer, the house bore fruit, rows of vegetables, jars in the cellar, chickens fat and strutting. The girl read aloud from a book. The boy built a slingshot. The baby walked, fell, and walked again. And Ruth, belly round with new life, stood at the porch railing, her hand resting on the wooden beam Eli had carved their names into. The wind touched her face like a blessing. Behind her, Eli called out from the field, waving her over. She stepped down into the dirt and walked toward him, the sun warm on her back, the land wide open ahead. If you enjoyed this story of survival, second chances, and finding home in the most unexpected places, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. There are more tales where mercy defies the rope and love outlives the law. Stay with us,